Hi, everyone, and welcome to our next case, Gibbons versus Ogden. I regret to inform you that we're sort of done with the Baltimore-based cases, but the good news is we're almost done with all of the sort of old-fashioned cases. We'll get into the 20th century before you know it, and I think that will help some of you because as we get closer to modern day, the kinds of like the writing style that these justices will use will be a little easier to understand. But this is another really, really important case from the Marshall Court era, so let's dive in. As always, make sure as you're going through and doing the reading that you can answer each of these questions. And if you have any issues trying to identify these things or don't understand what these questions are asking for, please, come visit me in office hours, pause this video and ask a question, whatever you need to do to get ready for the first exam. Okay, so what's going on here? Robert Fulton, as many of you may have learned in like high school history, invented the steamboat, and that was an incredibly important change to the American economy because steamboats back then were basically as important to like trucks and buses today in terms of being able to efficiently transport cargo, but also people, right? And Fulton may have been the brains behind it, but he partnered with Robert Livingston, who was an incredibly famous New York politician, a signer of the Declaration of Independence. And so, because Livingston was politically connected, he convinced the New York legislature to grant them a monopoly on steamboat traffic into the ports of New York City. And then, when Fulton no longer wanted to be in business, he wanted to retire, he sold his monopoly to Aaron Ogden. Here's the problem. Thomas Gibbons ran a passenger ferry between Elizabethtown, New Jersey, and other ports in New Jersey, as well as taking them to Staten Island in New York. And this business was based on a license he got from the federal government. And based on the federal government's law, the Coasting Act, passed in 1793. And because that license allowed him to enter Staten Island, he was told basically, like, no, you can't come here because Ogden's ships are the only ones who are allowed to come into any New York port. And Gibbons went there anyways, so Ogden takes him to court to have that monopoly enforced against him. Here is a picture of the very first steamboat that was invented by Robert Fulton. It was called the Claremont. And it was a huge deal because you didn't have to worry about whether the wind was blowing. You could just generate your own power. And it was certainly a lot more effective than transporting goods by land because, the roads were not in very good shape and you would either have to tow things with horses or oxen and stuff like that. And it's just a lot quicker and easier to put goods or people onto a steamboat. So what's the issue in this case? Does the Commerce Clause authorize the federal government to grant licenses to coastal vessels doing business across state lines? And actually, this is a fairly narrow way of understanding the case, but it's the easiest one for the purposes of studying for the exam. But what's really important is not what the answer to this question is, and spoiler alert, the answer is yes. It's how the court gets to that answer, because while addressing this issue, which seemed kind of narrow, the court tackles three really broad principles. One is, what does commerce include? Second is what kinds of when in the commercial process does Congress gain the power to regulate commerce? And then finally, how much power does Congress enjoy? And to understand the extent of Congress's power, we might look to some of the limits on Congress's power. And we're going to talk about two different kinds of limits. And this is not just true of the Commerce Clause, but any of the parts of the Constitution. If you're talking about an internal limit to a government power, you're looking within the clause itself, right? So the internal limits of the Commerce Clause are based on how the Commerce Clause is worded. External limits say that, okay, even once you've found the proper understanding of one particular clause, that one particular clause might be limited by another part of the Constitution that protects individual rights, for example. And we'll get into much more detail about these two concepts in a little bit. So, but before I pause here and have you guys start to read the case, here's the wording of the Commerce Clause. It's in Article 1, Section 8. Remember, there are 18 clauses in there, the 18th of which is necessary and proper. This case doesn't involve the necessary and proper clause. It's just commerce, right? So the Congress shall have power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. Really, we're not going to talk this semester about commercial regulations over economic exchanges with native peoples or with other countries. But we will be talking about what it means for Congress to regulate commerce among the several states as opposed to within a single state.